Hi guys, it's me Valkyrie, and today I want to share a few little tips on choosing more unique block palettes for your builds. So what we have here is a church I built using the classic Minecraft block palette. It's probably a block palette you have used before, maybe when you first started playing the game, or maybe you're still using it right now. And although this is a good looking block palette, it can get really boring after a while. In order to choose more interesting color combinations, you can make use of the color theory. Color theory is both the science and art of using color. It explains how we perceive color, and the visual effects of how colors mix, match, or contrast with each other. Color theory sets the fundamental guidelines around color combinations and harmony. And although designers and artists rely on this theory to make the correct choice for their projects, they are not the only ones. Most people make everyday decisions based on color theory and color harmony without even knowing it. Just look at the outfit you're wearing right now. Most likely you have combined colors that look good together without even knowing the type of color scheme you have applied while choosing your outfit. And if you are completely lost at choosing the right color combinations, you could learn and make use of one of the 7 major color schemes in your builds. The first one is by far the most simple one. It's the monochromatic color scheme. This color scheme uses a single color with varying shades and tints to produce consistent look and feel. And although your builds will lack color contrast, it will often end up looking very clean and polished. Here's a build example where I only used the monochromatic color scheme. And although this build is definitely lacking some contrast, the colors are balanced and in harmony with each other. The next color scheme you could try is the Analogous One. This color scheme is formed by pairing one main color with the 2 colors directly next to it on the color wheel. This color scheme is often used to create a softer and less contrasting design. Here's an example where I used this color scheme. After finishing your build, I do recommend playing around with the block placement a bit more. For example, right here, I personally don't like the placement of the purple blocks. So by playing around with it, you can actually create something that looks even better. We still have the nice color from the purple block, but it's more of an accent now and less overpowering. Another thing to keep in mind is the size of the build and its function. Since our example is a church, this block palette might not be the best choice, but it might be a great choice for a decorational element, like this decorational piece I'm building right now. The third color scheme is the complementary one. In this color scheme, you'll choose 2 colors that are directly across from each other on the color wheel and their relevant tints. So, for example, in this build, where it's mostly reddish-orange with hints of greenish-blue, it's best to use one color predominantly and use the second one as an accent in your build. Another thing to consider is the type of blocks that you use. In this block palette, I chose to use diamond blocks. It's a block that's kinda hard to build with. With blocks like these, I usually use them sparingly. Like in this example, you only see 1/4 of the diamond block, which gives a tiny pop of color that helps to move your eyes upwards towards the lighter part of the build. Another example where I use this type of color scheme is in this build right here. What we have right here is a very bright blue building with an orange roof that complements the blue nicely. I used quartz as a framing block in this build, since the concrete doesn't really have any variation to it. With blocks like these that don't have a lot of texture and don't have a stair or slab variant, I like to use framing blocks. It's usually a neutral color between white and black, so even though I use the complementary color scheme, it doesn't mean these would be the only blocks I use. And even though you would think that brown blocks like wood are neutral looking, I don't consider them framing blocks since they are a part of the color wheel, as you'll see in the upcoming examples. The fourth color scheme is a split complementary one. This color scheme includes 1 dominant color and 2 colors that are directly adjacent to the dominant color complement. This creates a more nuanced color palette than a complementary color scheme, while still retaining the benefits of contrasting colors. It can be tricky to find the right balance between the colors, so you might need to tweak your build a bit to balance out the colors. Here's a build where I made use of the split complementary color scheme. As you can see here, we still have a nice contrast in the build, but it's a more balanced block combination. This is another build where I used the split complementary color scheme. I started my color palette with dried kelp. This block is obviously dark green, so the split complementary colors to green are reddish purple and bluish purple. So I used the blue terracotta for the bluish purple and the crimson stem for the reddish purple. I also used dark prismarine and warped planks for the green. To bring balance and have a more cohesive build, I also used deep slate. The gray helps balancing out this block combination. By having little pops of colors throughout the build that is framed by the deep slate, it gives your eyes details to focus on. The fifth color scheme is the Triadic One. This color scheme offers high contrasting color palettes. Triadic color schemes are created by choosing 3 colors that are equally placed in lines around the color wheel. This color scheme is useful for creating high contrast between each color in your build, but it also can seem overpowering if all your colors are chosen on the same point in line around the color wheel. To subdue some of your colors in this color scheme, I recommend choosing one dominant color and using the others more sparingly, or simply subdue the other 2 colors by choosing a softer tint. A square color scheme uses 4 colors equidistant from each other on the color wheel. This color scheme does provide substantial contrast to your design, but it's still a good idea to select one dominant color rather than trying to balance all 4. This is a build where I use this color scheme. As you can see, I chose yellow as a dominant color and used the other 3 more sparingly. The 7th color scheme is the Triadic One. This color scheme approach is similar to the square color scheme, but it can offer a more subtle approach to color selection. Once you go above 3 color combinations, it is important that you have a clear vision of what your end goal is. Harmony and balance is harder to achieve, so you might need to try out different combinations before committing to your block palette. Like in this example, the block combinations for the church don't work for the build. The block palette, while interesting, seems to belong more in a circus type build than a church. So even though the colors technically work well together, they don't work well in this particular build. That's why it is important to have a clear vision of what you want to build and choose not only the color scheme, but also the colors that fit the build you have in mind. Now that you know the basics of color theory, let me share my quick and easy way of making block palettes that are unique. So my first tip is to go for a block you rarely use or have never used before in a build. This forces you to search for great color combinations and not rely on some block palettes you know well. Another thing to keep in mind while making your block palettes is that you most likely want to have some block options. Things like stairs, slabs and walls can help you out greatly to create detailed builds. Another thing to keep in mind is the feel you want your build to have. For example, in this build I only use darker blocks, which immediately gives the build a more dark and sinister feel. This is a block palette I might use in the Nether or in a dark enchanted forest, for example. The use of more muted pastel tones has a calming effect, like this church right here. This block palette I would probably use in a more peaceful environment. When I'm at loss for inspiration, I usually turn to art or fashion or interior design or even architecture for more inspiration. Just take a look at a certain painting or photograph that you like and try to color match Minecraft blocks to it. By actually using a painting or photograph as a block palette inspiration, you can combine some interesting block palettes that can push your Minecraft build to the next level. Another tip in choosing a unique block palette is letting go of the block name. For the longest time I have stopped myself from using mushroom stem or wool or note blocks in my builds just because of the name. By doing that, I really limited myself to stone and wood type blocks in my builds. By letting that go, I have expanded the amount of blocks I allowed myself to use in builds. Just by looking at the texture and the color of the block, and choosing the blocks based on their texture and color instead of the block name, I allowed myself to be a lot more creative with my builds. So just don't pay any attention to the name and look at the texture and color of the block instead. You might be surprised what type of block palettes you can come up with if you use all the blocks that are available to you. And if you are still struggling to find the right color combinations, you could make use of pre-made color palettes, like these for example. This website right here has a lot of color combinations ready to go. Just choose a palette you like and try to match Minecraft blocks to the colors that you see in the palette. That way you can create quite unique block palettes. And if you want more freedom in messing around with color palettes, then you could make use of the Adobe color wheel. As you can see here, you can adjust the colors in the color wheel. And again, just match the correct Minecraft block to the colors you see in your color palette. Alright you guys, these were some of my tips for making unique block palettes. I hope you have learned something new you can apply to your builds, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!